everybody, Roxabox90 here with a 4-way EDH Commander game. So this version is going to be a commentary version where I just improv off anything I'm thinking, whether it's Commander related, this game related. It's going to probably try to tie in as much as possible to the 4-way match here between 4 of the pre-con commanders. While the decks are not exactly the same, it's still interesting to see that the Jeleva deck and the Derevi deck are significantly different, while the Nekusar and Oloro decks are actually pretty close to the precon. So Jeleva here started off with just, keeping reasonable land base and trying to hold a ramp package because they don't have green in Jeleva, so it's good to try to have some good ramp. Same thing with Oloro, where it's more important to keep a ramp package in your hand than it is to keep just a general mix of cards that might necessarily be so useful early game, in multiplayer at least. Derevi, as you see here, green is in the colors, so 3 basics that are just basic planes, and then again some early game stuff, but not necessarily so important. While Nekusar is actually interesting, only kept 2 lands, period. It got very lucky because the game still worked out in their favor, so generally you want to keep 3-4 lands in your hand if possible. When you're playing multiplayer, 1v1 you might be able to risk it a little more, but actually other way around, multiplayer you probably risk it a little more. I still would try to aim for keeping 3 lands in your hand if possible. And the game started off pretty simple overall, so I'm not going to delve too much into what's going on in the gameplay itself, but I'll just mention that the Jeleva deck is significantly different. It's an instant sorcery build deck, which is really interesting because Jeleva herself is a very instant and sorcery heavy commander. So even when Jeleva is stealing from other players, you still get a mix of instants and sorceries from your own deck, often with her abilities, which is really nice. The Oloro deck is very much a life gain and life loss deck. It plays around with card advantage, which is Oloro's main function, to be honest. And for Oloro, in this game, there are infinite combos in the deck, but largely it's really just about long-term advantage. And as the game progresses, you'll notice that the life total of the Oloro player of Hills tends to stay pretty high, actually. And Jacob's deck is interesting because it's not the usual take on Derevi. Derevi usually is a flicker commander where you play Derevi and it bounces things and messes around with that sort of stuff. But in this build, which I'll have the deck list below, and maybe I'll actually do a deck tech for it, he's playing Bird Tribal, which is really unusual because Bird Tribal is very hard to pull off when there are so many terrible bird cards in EDH. It's very, in Magic in general, but in EDH it's very sad just how many bad bird cards there are. Yet he makes a deck that really works with Bird Tribal, and though it's a fairly budget deck, it's close to the original precon, it still does some very different things in terms of having, tribal stuff. The Nekusar deck has a classic card draw, discard, messing around with your opponents, having them take damage for drawing, having them take damage for discarding. It's a classic theme that Underworld Dream decks used to have back in the day, and this deck really puts it to full advantage. What's interesting also is that really goes for the big spells that work with that, which I almost never see play, but a card like Forced Fruition is insane in this kind of deck, and you can check out the deck lists for all 4 of these. I'm going to put them down below, maybe in pieces, maybe like one at a time, but I'll try to get them all up there as soon as possible. So getting back to the game itself, since while I am commentating, it's important to talk about what's happening in the game. So the game itself moved fairly slowly, at least at this point where we are. Everybody's still, like in most multiplayer games, it starts off 2, 3, 4 turns where not a lot happens, so to speak. I mean, you're playing a lot of small utility cards, you're setting yourself up, like this card is designed for long-term. The Airy card is designed long-term for birds, because as birds are dying, it gets things stronger. So you need to have birds, you need to have creatures dying for it to be really functional. What's interesting also is that in multiplayer EDH Commander, which a lot of people either may not play or may not have played yet, it's very dynamic, and 4-player is the ideal for this format. It's really nice if you can get at least 4 people playing, because while 1v1 dual commander, which I have some gameplays and deck techs for, and I do support it and I do enjoy it, 4-way is where EDH really shines, and the best decks, the most enjoyable decks, tend to be built for that format. And in this game you kind of see that, because a lot of the spells are designed to hit everyone or influence a lot of different factions on the field. And factions do change. In this version, you won't really notice it, but in other games I do potentially, and maybe in the highlights version I'll point out, different players were actually making teams as it went on, where the two people would team up to try to take care of one problem, or all three players would team up on one player for a short time, and then that would quickly change as someone else grew more powerful. It's a very interesting dynamic. And so here, if we see how the game is going so far, Jacob is really taking the board control in terms of creatures, but Hill has a lot of powerful spells that are, or artifacts and enchantments that are in play, which give a longer term advantage than having necessarily creatures. Creatures are generally the easiest thing to be killed in a four-way matchup, so relying on creatures is often rough, and that's why three of these decks, the Oloro, Jeleva, and Nekusar deck, all are much more spell-based than creature-based, and they're designed for 4+ games. That's not to say creature decks can't work, it's just harder to make them work because there's much more removal against creatures than basically anything else in the format, any other card type. So the Mimic Vat shenanigans that goes on imminently, I'm not quite sure where. Mimic Vat is really interesting because you get to take a card from any graveyard and when it dies, and then you can recast that card for 3 colorless mana and tapping the Mimic Vat, and you get the card into play with haste, and then you exile it end of turn. So if you play anything big over and over again, you can attack with it, you get its enter the battlefield effects. Very strong card, and it's a card from Scars, so people should know about it, but amazingly not huge number of people play it even in casual. It's really a big shining star in EDH. And as you see here, getting back to the game for a moment, Jacob is taking board control with his Amira Angel, and he's getting a bunch of 1/1 bird tokens, which will quickly become bigger if he has any of his birds die. Derevi as a commander is really powerful commander. I have a deck that's much more flicker based. Jacob's tribal build is very interesting because he's attacking a lot with a lot of creatures. So if the creatures actually get through and deal damage, even if it's little damage, he gets to untap or tap. He gets to tap down permanents or untap permanents, which is a very long-term advantage. It acts almost like a Seaborn Muse or Prophet of Crufix, if you know that one from Standard, where you start untapping lots of lands and you reset yourself at the end of the turn, which can be really crazy. It's much harder to do that if you don't have a lot of creatures doing damage. The Oloro player here, Hill, he has Neverall's Disc in play, and Neverall's Disc is untapped. That's a very powerful card because Neverall's Disc sits on the field, and like Oblivion Stone, can activate to wipe the board and cause havoc in that sense. So it kind of deters other Wrath spells, which is aggravating because Jacob had creatures before the Wrath went off and killed all his dudes. But otherwise, you kind of notice that that the Oloro player has the control of the board. If someone tries to destroy too much, he can potentially wipe the field clean with the Neverall's Disc, which is why it sees play even though it hits play tapped, which a lot of players don't like. If you notice also, Oloro's life total is up to 50 already. This is a long-term thing, which is why playing Oloro, while it's important to do it, it's not necessarily so important early on in the game. I mean, this isn't so early already now. We've had some ramp going on. The game is pretty much, it's nearing the mid-range game, the mid area of the game. And that's why Hill still has his powerful life total. Once you get your life total up enough, and he sets up a couple of things to gain life, like here he has Sanguine Bond, I think, hiding over here in the corner. Sanguine Bond is a combo piece for a deck like Oloro, but it also, every time he's gaining life, he's throwing damage at his opponents, which is really powerful. And this is really cool here. Hinder just swooped in to stop Derevi from hitting play, and Derevi's now going to go to the bottom of Jacob's library, which is going to be a big problem for Jacob, because when your commander gets tucked like that, not just shuffled into the deck, tucked at the bottom, unless you have a quick way of grabbing the back, it can potentially upset the whole strategy of the deck. And for Jacob, a lot of what makes his small tribal birds so powerful is because if Derevi is staying or sticking around, which it's, Derevi's her ability makes her stick around, being able to play her for 4 over and over again, here he's not going to have that advantage, and that really slows down a deck like his. So against certain commanders in the format at large, that's a very powerful effect, getting rid of the commander itself. And for Jacob, that really slows his deck here. Jeleva has been countered throughout the game. I didn't even mention it so far, but she's been countered at least once already, I think twice even. And that's what the biggest problem with Jeleva is that if you want to use her as a commander to really push for her, it's difficult to keep her around because people don't want her hitting play and exiling their cards. And the more that they prevent her, the more dangerous she is the next time it's being played. So in this game, all three other players, besides the Jeleva player, were trying to prevent Jeleva from hitting play and or from staying in play because she's such a strong, powerful commander, which warps the field a little bit because Mike desperately wants to put into play. It's not happening here. And that's a problem for the deck because, as you notice, Mike's kind of just hanging out there without Jeleva. And while this deck is not built for Voltron, it still could really use having a bit more going on in terms of what's in play for him. And then we have some more stuff hitting fields. Serene Master, Airy Mystics. These were all in the Commander 2013 set, so if you are familiar with those, you'll probably notice some of the cards. Airy Mystics, actually, the fact that it gives Shroud really helps with Bird Tribal. And you don't really notice it because it's such an expensive bird that doesn't seem to do that much, but in a tribal build, it's very awesome. Meteor Crater's a really, really nice, cheap land. A lot of players don't even know it exists, but if you want a budget land, it's one of the better ones out there. Here, you can't really see because Nekusar is blocking his own awesome card, but Thraxamundar is not the commander in the Nekusar deck, obviously, which makes him just a really powerful beater. And I think he just landed Underworld Dreams, which is a surprisingly powerful card. If you're running a Nekusar deck, even if it's a precon, you really want to try to get a copy of that in the deck because it accelerates Nekusar like crazy, and suddenly everyone's drawing a card, they take 2 damage instead of 1, which is twice the damage, and so twice the awesome. Mike here is really dropping down in life, and it's funny actually because I am Mike, but yeah, I'm dropping in life, and I'm down to 18 here. Everyone else is significantly higher, and life totals tend to fluctuate a lot in a 4-way EDH game because you can have someone get dropped down from a Sorin down to 10 and then work his way back up with a lifelink creature, while other players who are more powerful than them at that given time can slowly drop in life. So life totals tend to fluctuate. This group here, the group that I tend to play with, doesn't really like having infinite combos that are 2 pieces or that take forever to activate and do. And that's why any combos that are in these decks are either 3 or more pieces, or they're more difficult to get off and they end the game very quickly. So they're not aggravating. It's like, okay, you've earned that. None of the other 3 players could stop the player, and so you've earned that infinite combo. But generally, we don't really enjoy playing with infinite combos that are aggravating, take forever, or are undeserving. So a 2-card combo is often very annoying, and we basically never play with those. So people are still here. I mean, the game itself slowed down a little bit after the first Wrath. Hill still has full board control with the most. He has a creature that's getting a lot of +1/+1 counters from Cradle Vitality. He still has a Devil's Disc, so he controls the game, even though, honestly, he would hurt himself more by using it. But he could potentially disrupt other removal spells and Wrath spells, so it's a good choice to keep that around. Putting all your land down is not such a good idea, and so while here it seems like everyone has a whole bunch of land in play, most of us kept at least 1 or 2 land in our hands throughout the game. I checked that afterwards because if you have someone playing a Wrath spell that kills lands, you need to make sure you keep a couple land back. So players who just drop all their land as fast as possible, once you get 7-8 mana land in play for mana, it's really risky to put down a lot more land without keeping at least a couple in hand, because unless you play with 0 land destruction in your meta, which is fair, but we have some. So Shiziri's Step is really cool, and it's actually better for a Voltron deck, which this one isn't, but it does make this 7/7 Airy Mystic, 7/7 from that enchantment thing, I forget. It does make it unblockable for a turn, so it's a good land, and you could potentially put it instead of a Plains. But honestly, I think things like Flagstone and Trocera are probably better overall, and in this metagame, it definitely works. So here, Nekusar, the awesome. I really love Nekusar, and this deck is so very cool, especially because since the majority of the deck is pre-con, most of you out there who have Nekusar could very easily make some of the adaptations that are done to this deck to make it work really well. And it's quite phenomenal a deck. Now, probably my favorite three-color Grixis, three-color, Grixis is 3 colors, Commander. And Jeleva is a close second. Thraximunder originally was, but now I prefer Thraximunder as just a creature in deck. And actually, I think Thraximunder is in the Jeleva deck as well. But Thraximunder is here kicking butt in the field as a 9/9 monstrous death monster. And is awesome. So here, Decree of Pain, its play. And this is a really cool play right here, actually, looking at the game, because Decree of Pain would give Mike card advantage despite the Underworld Dreams and the Nekusar. But Hill is nervous because that would give him a lot of cards and refill his hand, giving him potentially a win con. So he never rolls discs in response to the Decree of Pain, which ends up clearing the field, and Mike gets nothing. He also doesn't lose the life from the Nekusar Underworld Dreams combo synergy sitting on the field, but he still loses the 8-cost spell he just did. It doesn't really do anything. So Hill comes out on top of that because he has Oloro bounce back to his hand the prior turn, so now he comes into play and has Oloro sitting on an empty field, which is really dangerous as a card draw engine. Any card draw engine sitting on the field without an easy removal or stopping of it is very, very dangerous. I'm not sure if anybody does manage to stop it, but that would long-term give an end to the game. So here, just everyone's trying to recover from the second Wrath in this game, I think, second or third Wrath. So nobody really has anything except they have a lot of mana. Eternal Witness getting back. Oloro sitting in play. Echo Mage long-term would probably give Alex a really good advantage, because if Jeleva hits play again or plays an instant sorcery, that card can be very, very powerful long-term as an engine. And just he played Careful Consideration. It's kind of hard to see here, but this card is much better to play on your turn, I believe, than as an instant. But for the Nekusar deck, he just needed the card draw, so you go for it. And then the game itself, at this point, once you've suffered several Wraths, most players are kind of slowing down, unless they have massive card draw somehow, like with the Oloro. But everybody's slowing down. The game's kind of hitting its end game here, and Oloro's in play. Jeleva, this is not actually 1+1 counters. Jeleva is just waiting to attack, because now that she's hit play twice, I think, three times even, there's a whole stack of instants and sorceries hiding behind the Jeleva icon. And if Jeleva attacks, she can cast any instant or sorcery from there for free. With that many cards exiled, 20, 30 cards, it should be very easy to find something powerful. So everyone was really nervous at the table, waiting to see if that would actually get anywhere, because a lot of removal has already been used. And so it's, as you see, Oloro and Jeleva are just sitting in play, relaxed and not having any problems. And the game is hitting its end stride, and often games do hit this lull where either the game has to end quickly or it deteriorates into long, slow, boring control matchups, which is aggravating because those games take forever. And this game was dragging a little bit as we near the end. Jacob managed to search up Derevi again, so he's hoping he can maybe get some more tokens, but he already lost his engines, he lost some of his anthems, and token decks, tribal decks, often suffer this problem in EDH, where they run out of stuff to do if they don't have enough spells to get stuff back from the grave. So I have other games that also show how tribal and weenie decks have trouble in 4-way playing, and they're often better 1v1, but that's not to say they're not awesome. Aggro decks can be very, very good. It's not to look down on tribal at all. It's just much harder to sustain yourself. And so as a mostly pre-con deck, it's even more difficult for Jacob to hold on. So here we have Nicol Bolas Planeswalker hitting play, and he's probably the most powerful Planeswalker, maybe with Karn, but if you can have him in your deck, he's one of the most powerful Planeswalkers in EDH. As you see, he just stole Oloro, and now Mike has basically full advantage despite the fact that his life total is lower. Oloro will help with that long term, and he swings with Jeleva, and now does it happen? Does it happen? Big spell, because if the big spell hits, and that could potentially wipe everything off the map, but it doesn't, because we murder Nekusar. Wow. 20, 30 cards on the side and he chooses murder. I must have had a reason for that, probably because Nekusar could kill Mike if he plays a huge draw spell, which is probably smart. But Nicol Bolas is lower now. Oloro's in play. So now Hill comes up, and this is actually kind of annoying because the game was very, very long. So the camera actually cut out, which is very sad because Hill has a ton of mana here, and he ends up setting himself up to do some crazy stuff here, where he plays a combo piece, and that combo piece comes out, and it's not so good because it's a 2-card combo piece, but it's very, very strong in terms of what it does, because you have this card, Exquisite Bond, I think it's called, Blood, and Vizkopa Guildmage, and if you can get damage in anywhere, vroom, the game's over pretty much. And that's what ended up happening shortly thereafter. I forget exactly what happened. Somehow he got one more damage to everybody, and then it was game over. So thanks for watching, everyone. Any further comments, feel free to leave them down below. If you like this video, tap the like button. I'll be getting you guys 2 highlight versions, one with music, one with not, as soon as possible. And as always, Roxabox90 signing out. I'll see you guys next time.